Hello, this is Pick, and welcome back to my developer commentary for Integration by Parts DX presented by FTB. Last episode was effectively Remixes Part 1, with some extra stuff thrown in. This episode is Remixes Part 2, with some extra stuff thrown in, who would have guessed? The first thing I set up today is production of fissile fuel. This is created from uranium, and to simplify that, turn yellow cake uranium into uranium oxide, combine that with hydrofluoric acid to create uranium hexafluoride, and then send that through the isotopic centrifuge to get fissile fuel. Using a quantum entangleporter, I can teleport that wherever I want. I'll be teleporting it onto the moon. Normally, when you work with mechanisms radioactive materials, you have to be careful not to irradiate the area or yourself. If you break a nuclear waste barrel, it'll completely irradiate the area and it'll take forever to clean itself up. Normally, you could use this as fuel in a fission reactor, but I don't really feel like doing that, so I'm just going to process it in the pressurized reaction chamber to create the nuclear waste I need. That gets sent into solar neutron activators, which turn it into polonium during the daytime. The solar neutron activators are a bit finicky, as they only accept input from the bottom and output out the front. Just make sure that the polonium goes into a nuclear waste barrel so it doesn't decay on its own. A universal pipe allows for all manners of things to be transported through it. This works well with the quantum entangleporter, which has much of the same rules. This means that I can import into the pressurized reaction chamber using one side for all of the inputs. You simply need to make sure all of the sides are configured correctly to allow for this type of behavior. It's gonna take a while to amass a lot of polonium, so this is the kind of thing you want to just let run in the background. As long as it's in the barrel, it won't be going anywhere. Do note that it'll only process during the day though. Little crafting tables are so last episode. What's in now is 5x5 crafting tables that I'm only actually going to use a couple times, but that's for balancing reasons. Anyway, I can make an infusion crystal in the 5x5 crafting table by inserting a bunch of other items. This opens up the rest of mystical agriculture, which basically is the lazy door for a lot of things you could possibly make. I'm only going to be using it under specific circumstances, like if I need a particular material and don't want to make a laggy farm to produce it. I abuse phytogenic insulators so much, it's kind of ridiculous. But by the way, did you know you can enchant the infusion crystal with both unbreaking and mending? It's like having the master tier crystal, just not the master tier crystal. Well, you also can't autocraft with this one because it still takes durability damage. With these higher tier essences, I can make better farmlands. Alone, the farmland itself increases the growth speed by a little bit, but the real benefit is going to be using growth accelerators later. Right now I don't have any, but it's worth something keeping in mind. There's an insane number of growth accelerators in this mod pack, so you can just spam all of them around a single farm space. A little more interesting than just setting up a bunch of phytogenic insulators or garden cloches, right? If the farmland itself is growth acceleration mark 1, then a growth lens on this crystal prism is acceleration mark 2. Growth lenses greatly increase the speed at which a crop grows and ticks. It's split between each of them though, so it will hinder the total amount while it does increase overall how much is growing. You can't just spam collector crystals either because they'll interfere if they're too close to each other. The lily pad of fertility is mark 3, though I only have enough to make one of them right now. I could make more. Why was I doing all this again? Oh, right, I wanted to automatically produce cakes. Chocolate cakes, because why not, you know? I'd also wager that cocoa beans are easier to farm than sugar cane. In a low lag kind of way, I mean. You have to break blocks in a sugarcane farm, but you just have to right click to harvest the cocoa beans. The Heraldium Ritual Anchor is tier 4 by the way. More than the crops though, it speeds up the machinery. I could just turn pumpkins into cakes like this, it would be much simpler than what I'm trying to do, but this is boring, you know? You're just doing a simple cheesy little conversion. The whole point of this is to feed some Kekamiris. I'm gonna need a lot of mana if I want to start producing Terra Steel at any decent rate. Yeah, I could just spam more mana death reactors, but come on, I want some different types of mana production. Now for Growth Acceleration Mark 5. By using a mana minecart and pumping mana from a pool into the minecart, I can transport that mana quickly over long distances. This means I can set up a pool by the farm to run an agrocarnation. I'll be adding a few more agrocarnations, but that's just another way of speeding up growth ticks for these plants. Mark 6 is this plant fertilizer. It takes a sewer from the chickens and it takes their waste and converts it into fertilizer. This can then be used like bone meal on crops by this machine. It's not too fast, but look, we're going for as many types of acceleration as we can. I just figured I'd slap it on because I already have the chickens there. Mark 7. By importing gunpowder from the mechanism setup as well as sand, I can create TNT, and combining that with resin make PNT. PNT also increases the growth, but also in a burst instead of perpetually like all the other stuff. It's like a TNT block, but it explodes with growth potential. I don't end up automating this though. It's a little bit laggy and I don't really want to, use super laggy things. Now for Mark 8, the growth accelerators. So you can put up to 12 of any type of growth accelerator under a mystical agriculture farmland, dependent on the tier. If I have Inferium farmland, I can only use 12 Inferium growth accelerators. They don't work on regular farmland. Because I have Tertium farmland, I can have 12 Inferium, 12 Prudentium, and 12 Tertium. I don't have nearly enough essence though to make Tertium. I'm just going to keep using the Inferium and maybe Prudentium later. To supplement egg production, I'm just going to make some chicken seeds. To spawn chickens to kill, I can use Blessed Earth, and then, by killing them with a Soulium dagger and holding some soul jars in my inventory, they'll fill up with chicken souls. You need 32 souls per seed, so it's a little pricey. So what was all that mana for anyway? It's for the boss fight simulator multi-block. Using some life points, some mana, some power, and an input item, I can have it fight a boss for me. Of course, to craft the Gaia Synthesis base, I'm going to need Terra Steel, hence why I have all this mana. It'll require a fair amount of crafting setup, but they're things I want to automate anyway for future use. Okay, so this setup handles the exports from the boss fight simulator. It's not filtered to handle all the runes yet, but those will be added in shortly. It's not important right now. Anything that goes into crafting the synthesis base goes right next to this sequential fabricator. It then inputs the materials and crafts them. There's also another sequential fabricator crafting Gaia Spirit ingots, as those are not outputted. If there's too little Terra Steel, it will supposedly auto-craft them. This goes through a few versions where I figure out exactly how I want it set up, and even by the end it's not perfect, but the point being that it's supposed to auto-craft Terra Steel and put it into the system. It also has a crafter that auto-crafts things with the portal. I could use the resources in the dimension already, but I think it's just easier to make an auto-crafter that sends the ingredients in and retrieves them instead of setting up a miner. Detectors are very handy stock limiters when you have systems like this. Now I'd like to automate slates, so to do that of course I'm going to need Demon Stone, which needs Will. To autocraft Will, I'm going to use a phytogenic insulator with the blood shroom, which can be gotten by bone mealing the grass on the slime islands in the nether. And then by farming them in the phytogenic insulator I can make coagulated blood. That gets melted down into blood and fills the containment chalice on top. The other side is going to fill up with soul sand, but that'll operate on an auto-crafter to make sure that it doesn't overfill. If the detector sees that the stock of wills in the system is too high, it'll automatically turn off the system to make sure that it doesn't overflow. For a small rebate of soul sand, I can actually use the sludge refiner that the sludge is currently being voided from with the harvester on the crop farm. It's not a lot of soul sand, but it's only a little bit that I need anyway, and this will keep it topped off. And this is just what that looks like all set up. As you can see, the detector is there to modulate the amount of soul sand that gets melted down. It'll keep melting stuff down if there isn't enough will in the system though. The first remix of today is going to be Blood Remix. This means I'm going to need a fair amount of life points in my soul network to get things going. I'm going to be using a Well of Suffering. I know it's like the lamest way of generating life points, but the crystal melting just isn't fast enough right this minute. To generate it though, I wanted to try to use some fancy setup using Industrial Foregoing's mechanical dirt. It didn't really work as fast as I wanted it to, and I ended up just having a bunch of witches down there and name them to make sure they don't despawn. It's kinda lame, but there's so much to do that a little cheese here and there isn't that big of a deal. I made a second altar specifically for the purpose of crafting things. In order to make use of it, I have runes of displacement. These allow more fluid to be transferred in and out of a given blood altar at a time by 20% per rune. This effect is multiplicative, so you'll get a lot more at the later stages than the earlier ones. I'd recommend around 20 for a setup like this, as well as that tank I have as a buffer in case I need to do a lot of crafting. You should make sure you have the same number on your input and output as far as displacement runes go. The other altar looks mostly the same except for I've replaced all the runes with either sacrifice, speed, or displacement runes. Also, there's a special feature with the blood altar where if you put a redstone lamp underneath the altar itself, it generates a redstone pulse every time it finishes crafting an item. With that out of the way, now we're finally ready to talk about Blood Remix. Of course, I've waited until everything's done crafting to get started. As with all the other remixes, the automation here is primarily self-contained within one compact machine. There's exception, of course. The life points are generated outside as well as a few other things. The system starts with this lava filling mechanism. It takes buckets and fills them with lava. Not that complicated. I have a sequential fabricator making buckets, but I didn't realize until later that I could just not have buckets automatically be crafted. All the other raw inputs get sent into that drawer, which get put into the alchemy table. This is what's in charge of making lava reagents. That's just one of the components though. Of course, using the item routing nodes, it makes it a lot easier to handle each side, and it's natively supported unlike the pipes that just cause it to crash. Now for the elemental inscription tools of fire. These are made by putting runes of fire from Botania in the blood altar. A soul munch do handles all the mana in this setup, but it doesn't really need a whole lot and it's not even constantly active. It gets picked up by the vacuumulator and gets sent up above to the chest. Then there's an alchemy table that's making Star Spirit alloy from Gaia Spirit ingots and star metal. Of course, you can see that that's why I needed automation of Terra Steel, because I needed Gaia Spirit ingots. But thankfully, one Gaia Spirit ingot basically makes 16 of the life-infused coolers, so it's not that bad. All three of those components are sent to a chest, and then on a timer, everything is sent in one batch to the hopper. Then, over time, they craft, and then you have everything you need for exactly one recipe prepared. Doing one recipe at a time was the best way to keep all the ratios in check, because dealing with ratios otherwise with stuff like those pipes and stack limiters is kind of a pain. It all comes down to needing the blood altar really, but that's not that big of a deal with how I set it up. It's worth noting that I've upgraded to 16 Kekamiras at this point, producing mana for the Terra Steel production. It still can't keep up, but I have an idea on how to fix it later. The upcoming Space Remix is going to require a little bit of quartz, so I'm going to make an orchid ignum to make as much as I need. I didn't realize that it only works in the Nether, but I'm still going to use the flux seal converter in Alfheim, that's exclusive to Alfheim, to produce the mana for it. So I came up with a system that automatically fills a mana tablet with mana. Mana tablets don't despawn like regular items, so you can drop it in a mana pool and have no fear of it despawning. Then, a vacuumulator filters to pick up just full mana tablets. This means that I just have to wait for it to fill up and I can send it back through the ender chest, then that goes into the nether, which drops it off and empties it into a new mana pool. This is what fuels the orchid, while once the drained mana tablet enters the system again, it just goes back into Alfheim and gets refilled and completes the cycle. It will try to convert all of the nearby netherrack first before it does any of the ones I want, but that's okay. Once it's all done, I can make the new setup. This new setup is going to use constructors and destructors. Actually just one, it's not that big of a deal. So what happens is, the constructor will place down a netherrack, and then the destructor will break it. But I can filter the destructor to not break netherrack, or just to only break ores, but making it not break netherrack is good enough. It automatically gets imported into the system. And you can even give it an enchantment. I could give it Fortune 3 if I wanted, and I think I will later. Now to get some magic eggs, I'll need 25 in total if I want to complete Space Remix. I can just sell circuits for 7 coins for 1 circuit if you get a discount from the cleric villager. It's good enough, and I just need to get 25 so I can keep auto-crafting circuits and getting more coins from it. Then I just run around and abduct all the aliens using the magical eggs. The computer will make all the components to make 25 rocket ships. The only thing that actually needs to be automated is the coordinate data modules, so everything else can be done in the regular crafting system on batch. I wouldn't make you autocraft rockets that you can't even autocraft anyway. Did someone order 25 tier 1 rockets? I did, because I made them. And they don't stack, and apparently they don't work in the auto crafter. Crap. I'll get up to the compact machine for coordinate data modules in a moment, but while I finish up crafting these space survival kits. Yeah, Space Remix isn't the best, but at least that's why I only made you craft 25 of them. That's why I only show off the interesting parts of the gameplay though. Obviously there's plenty of downtime even if there's important stuff to be doing. So let's get on explaining how the coordinate data module production works. The first thing of note is this black iron production facility. I'm using a spawner from RF Tools, and what that does is it spawns a skeleton every however long whenever it gets all the materials it needs from this matter beamer. The matter beamer converts energy into beam, I guess, and then the spawner accepts that beam, and once it's full it spawns a skeleton. Naturally, because that's the spawn condition for black iron, the iron gets converted into black iron and just keeps getting replaced. Then I'm automatically producing quartz enriched iron. I find it easy to use external storages to modulate the number of stock of an item I have at a given time, as you've seen much. Then I made an entire separate setup for health potions again. I think it's fine to just use the crystallized health potion when you're automating blazes and such. This then gets sent into casting tables with necrotic bones to make those blazing bones for 1k storage modules. I don't have necrotic bones completely automated yet, but I'm making a few stacks at a time just using lightning. Then the 3 components for the 1k drive get sent into this sped up lunar satellite dish. Where's the waves for the satellite dish coming from? Who knows. That gets sent through an ender chest to the moon, where the lunar satellite dish on the moon just turns those into coordinate data modules. I'll fully automate this stuff when I feel ready for it. I just don't feel ready for it right this minute. So I just did Botanic Remix 2. Yeah, I guess we're going right into that one, huh? 400 wispy petals later, and that's the 6th remix complete. I guess I'll predicate this by saying that this whole system is running rather poorly off of one single munch dew. I would not recommend doing this, I'm gonna upgrade it later. Phytogenic insulators happen to produce the carrots and sugar I need, and then I have a cow in a jar making milk. These ingredients get combined into glazed carrots. I'm importing the fake hot air from the overworld. Remember that cupcake setup I had? Yeah, I'm just mooching off of that hot plate. I found a new trick with detectors. So if the system detects that it doesn't have enough of the item, I just have the system turn on, and it turns off if there's less. That sounds redundant, right? Well, it completely beats having one of those stupid timers. Because of the delay on the system, it just automatically sets a timer by having that delay. A slimy sapling is making more slimy saplings by using a phytogenic insulator, and then all of these components go into this setup in the back. This makes runes of spring. Something notable about runes of spring is that it uses a rune of water and a rune of fire in its crafting recipe, but those get given back after completion. This means that I have a special pickup machine that only picks up runes of fire and water after the crafting is complete. When you put a comparator on a runic altar, it emits a signal of 1 if it's still obtaining mana, a signal of 2 if it's finished collecting mana and needs to be clicked, and a signal strength of 3 if it's resetting. This means that I can reduce that signal of 2 to 1 and only have it activate that dispenser with the Wand of the Forest in it when it's ready. Then we have a setup over here that has a botanic brewery. This doesn't require any clicking on it, you just need to drop all the ingredients and let it receive mana and it'll automatically export the product. Overall, it's the simplest step, though I do have a phytogenic insulator producing the feathers for it. I'm already making nether wart, and I can just make mana glass in a pool and auto-craft it. The requester comes in handy for things that don't really need high demand. The Rune of Spring, among other components, culminate up top, where they get turned into fallen canades. To make the petals, I used mushrooms instead. It's just a mushroom and some dye, so it's actually really easy to make them. You just send them into the pool. Now, there are several ways to fill the pool. You could use the special flower from Mythic Botany that autofills it, a living wood avatar with a Rod of the Steeds and some mana nearby, or you could just dump a water bucket in it. I think that's the easiest step for this because it goes in line with everything else. The final step is the culmination of everything, and it's probably the easiest too. It's just a runic altar, but you know, typical rules with the runic altar. You have the comparator, and that gets hooked up to that dispenser, and of course all the droppers are being exported with their respective items. Something you can see in the top is that I automated living rock up here. It makes it a lot easier to manage things when you have an automatic production of living rock instead of just going all the way out to Alfheim every time I want some. I did need to automate Ender Air to make Corpori Sparks, but that's simply a matter of having dispensers being activated with empty glass bottles. Thank you, Botania, for naturally having a way to automate this. Apparently item users don't work, which is fine. The setup is actually quite compact too, smaller than I thought it was going to be. I have so many network receivers, it's actually kinda crazy, just scattered about dimensions and compact machines and all that other junk. This was a long remix, but you kinda see how I did it, I guess. I guess I accidentally talked a little too fast, because now I need to fill up space to make it to the end of this clip. Oopsie doodle. The Mix Mart has a decent reward for this, an overgrowth seed. This'll double the effect of any Botania flower, like all the Kekamiras I'm gonna use it on later. Note to self, never record a 4-minute long clip ever again. It's just not worth it. So, 3 more remixes out of the way, only one more of the main 7 to go, and I'll be doing that in the next episode. Thank you, this has been Pick, I'm glad to have seen you, and I hope to see you again.